So the 1965 Hart-Celler Act essentially changed the face of America. America is what it is today because of this law. And what it did was it overturned the quotas and it allowed for family reunification. And it also allowed for folks to come over with certain professional degrees. So what we see is that by the 1970s, Latin America is facing a lot of economic and political turmoil. So not just for the Jews, right? But we see this all over Latin America through the 80s. Number of revolutions, we have coups, we have military juntas, we have a number of economic crises where, you sort of go from a nationalist economies to IMF imposed neoliberal economies that leave a lot of people without money, without jobs, without a way to eat. And this is really the push factor that drove folks to leave Latin America. So in 1965, what we begin to see is that a lot of people are able to come over because they're doctors or they're nurses or they're engineers or they have certain degrees. By the 1970s, in the Southern Cone, Jews could come over, for example, with these qualifications. And this is also the time that we begin to see the rise of the military juntas in Latin America. Once folks start to come over, they can bring their families over. So overall, this changes the migration streams, right? And so now, once you've been here for a certain amount of time, you can bring your spouse, you can bring your adult siblings, you can bring your adult kids. And this is how we begin to see, what we call family reunification migration. And this really changes the racial makeup of America. There were very few immigrants between 1924 and 1965. We had some folks that came over that were refugees from the war. But other than that, in general, the big push towards migration really happened post 1965. But what that means, I think, is we have to rethink the racial dichotomy schemes of the United States, right? Because now the migration stream is such that we have immigrants from all over the world. Asian immigrants, Latin American immigrants, we have brown immigrants, Black immigrants, African immigrants, Caribbean immigrants, and Latino Jews, which are essentially white immigrants. We need to think about how this is happening in the United States around the time of the Civil Rights Movement. We're beginning to, as a society, really take stock of what it means to be a person of color in the United States, what diversity means. And for many years, we sort of embraced diversity, I would argue, until we get to 2016. And this is important, particularly for Latino Jews, and this is a point that I make, is that we embrace diversity sort of. So as we begin to think about the racial makeup of the United States, so what happens is that folks who are from Latin America or folks that are Black from the Caribbean or Africa are better positioned to achieve upward mobility in the United States than an African American or a Mexican worker or someone whose class intersects with race in such a way that they will face structural barriers to achieving upward mobility. So one of the things that I point out about Latino Jews in the United States is that they're able to sort of use their Latino background to their favor. In a world that kind of celebrates diversity, particularly in the areas where they reside. I also want to point that out. Most Latin American Jewish immigrants come to the United States and are going to reside in urban areas where diversity is somewhat celebrated. So they are able to be diverse, but also be safely diverse because they're white and they're educated. And because Jewishness is synonymous with whiteness in the United States, oftentimes they might signal to people, well, I'm Latino, but really I'm Jewish. So I'm much more like the white mainstream than, a brown Mexican immigrant that crossed the border.